As I say, people on the left immediately jumped to political positioning. Elizabeth Warren did the routine. We have to do something now to stop it. So I'll talk in a second about what could be done to stop these sorts of things, if anything. But she's not the only one. Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, tweeted out something quite disgusting. He tweeted out, "Dern tootin', great shootin', cool dude certain, he's Second Amendment right. Hell yeah." And he spells rights R-A-H-T-S because it's supposed to be in a southern accent. "Every country has its psychopaths. In U.S., they have guns." Okay, well, in Britain, they've been murdering people. They've had multiple terror attacks, including in Manchester, using weapons and bombs. And, this idea that it's only in the United States we have to worry about this stuff is just not true. But Richard Dawkins could use a little bit of God because apparently he lost his tact and his decency when he lost his God. There are a few problems with jumping to conclusions here. One, again, we still do not know the shooter's motive. This happened last night. We still have no inkling of the shooter's motive. How the shooter acquired his weapons, we still don't know. So suggesting laws that we don't know would stop this guy from acquiring the weapon in the first place is always troublesome. Now, to be intellectually honest, I want to say you can propose a good law that doesn't necessarily deal with this specific situation, right? It's not like every law has to deal with the specific situation at hand. If it reduces the probability of a situation like this, or if it doesn't even have to do with this situation, but it's going to make things safer generally, right? You can pass a seatbelt law that has nothing to do with a mass shooting. The seatbelt law can still be good, but it's dishonest to suggest that using a situation like this to push a law that wouldn't have stopped a situation like this, the two things are related, because they're not, right? If you use this to push a child safety law about cribs, that's obviously unrelated. Well, if you use this incident to pass a law or push a policy that has nothing to do with this particular shooting, again, unrelated is unrelated. And then there's a final point, and this is something that we all fall into, whether on the right and on the left. When something bad happens, we immediately jump to, what could the government have done? What should the government have done? Making policy in the heat of passion is not a good way to make policy. It's why we don't have a democracy. It's why we have a republic. It was to shield policymaking from the passions of the public. It was to shield policymaking from the problems inherent in getting very emotional and passionate about situations. The fact is that policy is best made when we're at a bit of a remove. Injecting emotional accusations into the process does not make things better. It just makes things more polarized. We saw this after Barack Obama would push gun control after every mass shooting, and people would say, wait a second, are you implying I don't care when people get shot just because we disagree? All it does is make people, we're unified in how evil this is. We're Americans, we're brothers and sisters. Polarizing the electorate on the basis of a policy and suggesting that people who disagree with you don't care about shootings like this is really nasty. What I say about this is now is a good time to shut up about policy. It's actually a really good time to contemplate the nature of human evil, to gather all the information and stay silent. There'll be plenty of time to talk policy. I'm not even telling you wait 6 months. I'm telling you wait 48 hours. Wait 24 hours. There'll be plenty of time to talk policy when all of the details are out, and then we can have a real good debate about what are the costs and benefits of policies. Because, as I say, you could pass a policy tomorrow. It would violate the Second Amendment, but you could try to pass a policy banning all guns in the United States. But that has costs, and it has benefits, and it has risks, and it has rewards. But we have to discuss those rationally without suggesting that people who disagree somehow don't care when bad things happen to good people. Now, pictures from this whole thing are horrifying, and I want to talk a little bit about the nature of evil, because there's one word that I've steadfastly attempted to avoid when discussing issues like that, and that is the word tragedy. You'll see a lot of people today use the word tragedy. I don't use the word tragedy in relation to acts of human evil. A tragedy is what happened in Puerto Rico. Right? A tragedy is a natural disaster that happens, an unavoidable incident, a cancer that hits somebody and they die of illness. Right? That's a tragedy. It's not a tragedy when somebody evil does an evil thing. That's an act of evil. That's an act of evil. And this person bears full responsibility for that. This person will burn in hell for what they did today. It's just horrifying in every way. So let's talk about evil. I think that it's very easy when horrible things happen for us to say evil is something other. Evil is something alien. Evil is something that's not us, right? It's just something that's far away from us. And we have to discuss in situations like this, what is the exact type of evil that we're talking about? Because there are actually several types of evil. Evil is not just one big amorphous thing. Evil is a descriptor of acts. If you're talking about acts, then it is a big amorphous thing, right? An act to kill a child is evil. But when we're talking about evil people or evil belief systems, we have to distinguish what makes a person evil or a belief system evil other than just the act. Because, again, there are many types of things that drive people to do those evil things. That's what we're talking about now, the evil motivation. And how we make policy is largely dependent on what kind of evil motivation we're talking about here. So there's a guy named Roy Baumeister. Roy Baumeister is a psychologist, and he's also a terrific writer. He has an entire book called Evil, Inside Human Violence and Cruelty. I've quoted it in some of my college speeches. And he breaks down evil into basically 4 forms of evil. And I think it's important to talk about these 4 forms of evil and determine if what we saw last night was one of these 4 forms or was it something else. So here are the 4 forms of evil that Baumeister talks about. The first form of evil is what he calls instrumental evil, instrumentality. This is the idea that you have an object in mind and you don't care what means are used in order to gain that end. You want money, you don't care that it's not your money, you go to the bank, you rob it, you shoot somebody. That is instrumental evil, right? This is suicide bombers who think that they are doing some greater good by killing a bunch of children in a pizzeria. That's instrumental evil. The ends justify the means. And that's one we all have to be careful with, because we have a tendency to fall for that, right? That's an easy human one to fall into. And when you wonder why good people become evil, that's an easy one to fall into, to say my ends are so important it doesn't matter if I treat another human being as a means. Okay, the second form of evil that Baumeister talks about, or the second motive for evil, is what he calls threatened egotism. He says that violence isn't perpetrated by those with low self-esteem, but those with relatively high self-esteem or self-esteem that was threatened. Here's what he said. He said, quote, "Violence is perpetrated by a subset of people who think well of themselves, and indeed it mainly occurs when they believe that their favorable images of self have been threatened or attacked. This is the danger inherent, this is the one I talk about at college campuses, this is the danger inherent in what we call microaggressions culture, right? The idea that you're being insulted and therefore you have the right to lash out at somebody. That's a kind of evil we also have to watch out for in ourselves. And I would suggest that we have to be careful when we talk politics because of this, right? We have to stop feeling offended when we disagree politically. We have to stop attributing evil motives to people who disagree with us, because then we're more likely to become evil ourselves. The third form of evil is idealism. This is really just a subset of instrumentality. This is the people who believe that communism justifies the murder of 100 million people because we're creating utopia. The closer we try to hew to utopia, the further we move away from human freedom and justify violence. And finally, there's sadism. Right? Sadism is the least common type of evil. It's the one that we tend to attribute evil acts to the most, but it's actually the least common type. Sadism is the idea that you enjoy violence, right? You're just a kid who tortured puppies, and now you go out and you murder human beings. This is very, very uncommon. His theory is that it would be more common except for guilt, that we all have guilt, and so if we do something bad, we feel bad about it. Once that guilt is removed, then we have a tendency to engage in further evil. Now, the reason I'm breaking down these types of evil is because when we make policy, we have to determine what sort of evil we're fighting. Several of these types of evil are actually only fightable. They're only combatable through moral education, right? So ends justify the means thinking. That is only combatable through moral education. You can have laws on the books that stop people from committing violence, but that's not going to help you if people are willing to break those laws in order to achieve a higher end. Moral education is the only way that you can prevent that. That's not something that can be done at the governmental level. It has to be done at the individual level, at the community level, at the school level. That's something that we all have a part in helping to prevent. Well, how about threatened egotism, the motive that springs from threatened egotism? Well, there, I think that it's important. Again, moral education has to take a hand here. We all have to acknowledge that political disagreements do not involve a blight on your identity. Idealism, same thing. Your ideals do not justify violence. This is a moral education issue. Sadism is one where, and if this looks like a sadistic crime, which it may well be, or if this is a crime of mental illness, that's the one where we can talk public policy. Because the problem is with all the other three you're talking about, everyone is susceptible to it. Everyone is susceptible to instrumental evil. Everyone is susceptible to idealistic evil. Everyone is susceptible to threatened egotism evil. So if you promulgate a regulation targeting any of those three things or any of those three types of people, you're going to take away rights from everyone. The only types of people that we can profile are sadists and mentally ill people. Those are the only types of people that we can profile. This is why you see the great discrepancy between how the left describes stuff like this, talking about the instruments of evil, the guns, and the right talks about how do we actually stop people from committing these acts. They're two completely separate conversations. I want to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But first, I want to... Okay, so the reason that I discuss evil is because I think this is what conservatives tend to do. We tend to say, okay, how do we stop people like this evil piece of garbage who shot 500 people in Las Vegas last night? How do we stop people like that from doing what they do? How do we separate those people from guns? And the left says, if everybody is susceptible to being bad, then nobody should have a gun. Well, the reality is that the vast majority of people who are susceptible to being bad are not people who do this. And I still agree with the basic argument that the only way to stop a guy with a gun is a guy with a gun. And in this particular case, it was law enforcement because this was a planned terror attack that was occurring from a vantage point high up where only law enforcement could do something about it. But there have been a number of situations where people with guns have stopped people with guns. That is certainly the case. All the arguments for the Second Amendment don't stop applying just because somebody misused the Second Amendment or obtained their gun illegally. We don't even know how this guy obtained his gun in the first place. So, again, there'll be lots of time to discuss the policy implications of all this tomorrow. All I would suggest for everybody is that we focus in on how we cleanse our own hearts of the tendency to do evil things, how we look at the world, and that we think a little bit more about the fact that we're all brothers and sisters in this fight against evil people, and we really need to focus together on how we can make our country a better